This is a repair and maintenance video for the General Pump model MWSR. Before starting, you will need the cylinder removal kit F27632500 and FKIT MWP. The tools from this kit that you will need are a packing cylinder removal tool with handle, piston guide insertion tool and removal tool with bolt, support pins, a 2-inch piece of PVC pipe approximately 12 inches long, a ratchet with extension, a 17mm socket, an 8mm and 5mm hex drive, a rubber mallet, a flathead screwdriver, needle nose pliers, a round head tool, a pick, an impact wrench with a 14mm hex drive, packing lubricant, a torque wrench, and an adjustable wrench. First, remove the outer two manifold retaining bolts. After removing these bolts, insert the two long positioning pins. Once the pins are securely in place, remove the remaining retaining bolts. Slide the manifold out slowly and carefully, paying attention to the spring-loaded packing supports as they may fall out. Remove the support pins. Use the ratchet and a 17mm socket to remove the plunger retaining bolt. Remove the plunger. At times, the packings may remain on the plunger. On top, remove two 5mm bolts from the crankcase access cover. Rotate the crankshaft to position the piston guide to its rearmost position of the crankcase. Be sure to allow room for the packing pusher tool. Insert the packing pusher tool and rest it on the shoulder of the piston guide. Install the packing pusher tool. Remove the handle. Rotate the crankshaft, which will push the sleeve out of the crankcase. Remove the O-ring and the slinger washer. Install the removal sleeve onto the end of the piston guide using the bolt with the 8mm hex drive. Snug the bolt up. Use the adjustable wrench rotating the crankshaft to pull the tool into the seal and to pull the seal and tool out of the case. Remove the retaining bolt. The tool and seal will come out as one from the top of the access hole in the crankcase. Install the insertion cone onto the end of the piston guide using the same bolt. Reinsert the seal through the access hole at the top of the crankcase. Place it onto the cone. With the nylon insertion tool, pound the seal into place. Use the 8mm hex drive to remove the bolt. remove the insertion cone from the guide. Reinstall the slinger washer. It should be installed onto the shoulder of the piston guide. Apply packing lubricant on the inside corner of the crankcase. This helps to support the O-ring and keep it in place. Reinstall the O-ring and be sure it is properly seated in the corner of the crankcase. Inspect all of the plungers for cracks, pitting, or scoring, and replace if necessary. Reinstall the plunger onto the guide. Reinstall the plunger bolt. Note that the washer should be replaced each time it is removed. Torque the plunger using the torque specs, which can also be found on page 52 of the repair manual. Hold the complete packing assembly and apply lubricant to the low pressure seal, the high pressure seal, and the rest of the component. This will help the packing assembly easily slide over the plunger. Using the piece of PVC pipe, carefully tap it over the plunger until it is fully seated into the crankcase. Wipe any excess lubricant from the plunger. Remove the crossover O-ring and inspect for fraying or damage. Check to ensure the crossover opening is not obstructed. Reinsert the crossover O-ring. Insert the long support pins to the outermost upper holes. Place the manifold onto the two support pins, but do not push the manifold all the way back into position. Apply lubricant to the top of each plunger. This will help keep the springs in position when you reapply the manifold. This is a spacer plate for the packing support. Inspect each one for any damage. Inspect the O-ring for damage. Replace it to the back side of the manifold. Slide the manifold back into position. Insert two bolts, one on the top row and the other on the bottom row, diagonally across from each other. Tighten each bolt at intervals starting with the inside bolts. This will pull the manifold back into proper position. Remove the support pins. Reinstall the remaining bolts. These bolts should be torqued in a sequence starting with the middle bolts and working around in a circular pattern. Use the proper torque specs, which can also be found on page 52 of the repair manual. Reinstall the crankcase access panel and torque the two 5mm bolts according to specs. Use the proper torque specs, which can also be found on page 52 of the repair manual.